I'll never forget the night I checked into St. Vincent's Hospital. I wasn't supposed to be there, not for any serious reason. I was just feeling a bit off, a little dizzy, you know? But the moment I stepped through those sliding glass doors, something didn't feel right. It was late, around 2 a.m., and the place was eerily quiet, almost too quiet. The fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting an unsettling glow over the sterile, white walls. I tried to brush it off as just the usual hospital atmosphere. After all, who hasn't been through the unnerving experience of late-night visits to the ER? But something else was there, something I couldn't put my finger on. I wasn't the only one in the waiting room, but the others didn't seem right. They sat motionless, their eyes fixed on the floor, not a word spoken between them. One woman, her name was Cynthia, had a strange, wide smile plastered on her face, but there was something wrong with her eyes. They were glazed over, unfocused, like she wasn't even aware of her surroundings. "Are you okay?" I asked, trying to make small talk. Her smile twitched. "I'm just waiting," she replied in a voice so soft it almost felt like a whisper. Before I could ask her what she meant by that, a nurse called my name, and I followed her down the cold, sterile hallway. The floors echoed beneath my steps as I passed room after room of empty beds. There was an odd scent lingering in the air, a mixture of antiseptic and something else, something faintly metallic that I couldn't quite place. When we reached my room, I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the anxiety in my chest grow. There was an unsettling stillness in the air. The nurse left, and I was left alone in the dimly lit room, the only sound being the quiet beeping of a nearby heart monitor. And then I heard it, a soft tapping sound, coming from the corner of the room. I looked around, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from, but there was nothing. The tapping continued, faint, like fingernails tapping gently against the walls. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But then it stopped, and in that silence, I could hear something else. A low, guttural whisper, like a voice coming from nowhere, from all directions. "Help me." I froze. The whisper was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. It came from the far corner of the room, the one closest to the window. My eyes darted over to that corner, but it was dark, too dark to make out anything. My heart started pounding in my chest, my hands clammy with sweat. The voice whispered again, "Help me." This time, I could swear I heard the faint sound of movement, like something shifting in the shadows. I jumped off the bed, my instincts screaming at me to run, but I couldn't. My legs felt like they were made of lead, frozen in place. I stood there, staring at the corner, waiting for something, anything, to move. And then, without warning, the lights in the room flickered. Once, twice, and then they went out completely. I was plunged into darkness. A cold chill ran down my spine as I reached for the call button beside the bed. My fingers fumbled, trying to find it, but I couldn't. My hands were shaking too violently. The tapping started again, louder this time, closer, as if whatever was in that corner was moving toward me. And then I heard it, a soft, shuffling sound, like feet dragging across the floor. My breath caught in my throat as I turned around, trying to make sense of the noise, but there was nothing there, just the suffocating darkness. The whispering returned, louder, more urgent. "Help me. I can't get out. I had to get out of there. I had to leave." But before I could move, I felt something brush against my leg. My pulse shot through the roof as I whipped around. But again, there was nothing, only the cold, empty air. The door to my room creaked open slowly, and for a moment, I thought it might be the nurse returning. But when I looked, it was only a shadow standing there. Tall, gaunt, almost unnaturally thin. Its face was obscured by darkness, but I could feel its eyes on me. Couldn't breathe. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice barely a sound. The shadow didn't answer. It simply stood there, silent and motionless. The whispering voice grew louder, as if whatever was in that room was trying to reach me, trying to warn me. "Help me. Get out." I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what was real anymore. But there was one thing I knew. I wasn't alone in that room. And whatever it was, it wasn't human. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, and the shadow was gone. But the whispers, they didn't stop. I rushed out of the room, not caring who saw me. I didn't even know where I was going. I just needed to get away. As I stumbled through the hallways, I passed empty room after empty room. Some doors were slightly ajar, and I could hear things moving inside. Scraping sounds, heavy breathing, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. And then, just as I rounded the corner, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me. They were following me. I kept walking, faster now, trying to ignore the sound of footsteps behind me. They were slow, deliberate, but there was something off about them. Like whoever was following me was waiting for me to make a mistake. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, there was no one there, just the same empty, sterile hallway stretching into the darkness. My breath quickened as I rounded another corner. I thought I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned, there was nothing. I reached the end of the hall and found a stairwell door. It was a way out, I thought, a way to escape whatever was hunting me. My heart pounded in my chest as I pushed open the heavy door and ran up the stairs, hoping to find some semblance of safety on the upper floors. But the higher I went, the worse it felt. The building was quiet, too quiet. The air was thick, suffocating, and the overhead lights flickered every few steps I took. I felt like I was being suffocated by the oppressive stillness of the place. I reached the top floor, the emergency floor, or so I thought. It was supposed to be a restricted area. The floors up here were marked with faded signs, and the paint on the walls was peeling, as if no one had cared for this part of the hospital in years. That's when I saw her. A woman was standing at the end of the hallway, her back to me. She was wearing a hospital gown, the same as mine, but she was different. Her hair hung in tangled strands around her face, and she didn't move. She just stood there, as if waiting. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice trembling. No answer. I stepped forward, hesitant, my every nerve on edge. I could hear the sound of my footsteps echoing through the silence. I stopped a few feet away from her, my heart pounding. "Are you all right?" I asked, trying to stay calm, though panic was creeping into my voice. She didn't respond. I was about to take another step when the hallway light flickered one last time, and in that split second, the woman turned. Her face was a twisted mess of flesh, pale and sickly, her eyes black as coal. Her mouth stretched unnaturally wide, a grin so grotesque it almost looked like it was torn into her skin. But what struck me the most were her hands, long, gnarled fingers that scraped across the floor as she moved toward me, dragging herself with an unnatural, jerky motion. I froze. There was no time to run. She let out a low, guttural laugh, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "You should have stayed in your room," she whispered, her voice like nails on a chalkboard. And then, without warning, she lunged at me. I scrambled backward, heart racing, but my legs couldn't move fast enough. Her fingers grazed my ankle, and I felt a cold, sharp pain shoot through my body. I kicked at her, desperate to break free, and finally, with every ounce of strength I had left, I shoved her away. She fell to the floor with a sickening thud, but I didn't stick around to see if she got up. I ran as fast as I could, the sound of her laughter echoing behind me, getting closer. Somewhere, deep down, I knew I wasn't going to make it out, that whatever was in this hospital, whatever was stalking me, wasn't going to stop until it got what it wanted. And now it was hunting me. I was running, not knowing where I was going or how much longer I could keep it up. The pain in my leg was unbearable. Whatever that woman had done to me, it was as if her touch had left something inside me, something cold and sharp, crawling through my veins. I had to find a way out. I couldn't stay here. The footsteps behind me grew louder, and I realized, with a sinking feeling in my gut, that I wasn't just being followed by the woman. There were others. From the corners of my vision, I saw them, shadows, figures darting in and out of the doorways, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. They were waiting for me, watching me, and I knew, deep down, that they weren't going to let me leave. I stumbled into a small, dimly lit room at the end of the hall, hoping to hide, but it was no use. The door slammed shut behind me, locking with an eerie click. I whipped around, heart hammering, but the room was empty. Just a few old chairs, a desk covered in dust, and a single window that was too high to reach. And then I heard it, the whisper, that same voice I had heard earlier, now louder and more insistent. "Help me." I spun around, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The voice wasn't coming from the walls, though. It was coming from the desk, from the small drawer that was slightly ajar. With trembling hands, I approached the desk, opening the drawer slowly. Inside was a thick file yellowed with age. It had no label, just a name written in red ink. Jonathan Crow. I pulled the file out, my heart sinking as I opened it. The first thing I saw was a photograph. A man, his face gaunt and hollow, with dark circles under his eyes. He looked almost like a shell of a person. Below the photo was a note, written in a hurried, frantic scrawl. "He knows what's happening. He's the key. Find him. He's the only one who can stop it." I felt a chill crawl up my spine as I flipped through the rest of the file. There were medical records, all from years ago, reports about patients who had gone missing, strange occurrences in the hospital, and something about experiments. But the most chilling part was the last page, a diagram showing the layout of the hospital, with certain rooms circled in red. And in the center of the diagram, my room. I looked up, my mind racing. The footsteps were getting closer now, and I realized something. It wasn't just the patients who were after me. The entire hospital was alive. Alive with something dark, something ancient. And it was feeding on us, drawing us in one by one. The whispers had never been about asking for help. They were luring me, just like they had lured all the others before me. And then it hit me. Jonathan Crow, the man in the photo, he was the key. The one who had survived. The one who knew the truth. But he wasn't just any man. The file didn't just tell his story. It told mine, too. His fate had already been sealed here, and now mine was too. I didn't have much time left. The hospital wasn't just haunted. It was alive, feeding off the souls of those trapped within it. I had one choice: find Jonathan Crow. Find him and end it before I became another whisper in the darkness. As I turned to run, the door behind me burst open, and I knew without a doubt that it was too late. The door slammed open, and I didn't hesitate. I ran, faster than I thought possible, my heart pounding so loudly in my chest that it nearly drowned out the sound of the footsteps chasing me. I could feel the hospital closing in around me, its halls stretching endlessly, twisting like a labyrinth with no exit. But then, just as I turned a corner, I saw it. A door. A metal door with a small window. It was different from the rest of the doors in the hospital, sturdier, more fortified. And on the wall beside it there was a nameplate. Jonathan Crow. My heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the man who had survived. The man who had made it out, or at least that's what the file had suggested. Without thinking, I pushed against the door. It creaked open, revealing a dimly lit room filled with old equipment and boxes. The smell in the air was stale, like something hadn't been touched in decades. But in the center of the room, in the farthest corner, there was a figure hunched over, facing the wall. He was real. Jonathan Crow. I stepped forward, but as I did, he turned his head, and I froze. His eyes were wide and empty, like they had been pulled out and replaced with something hollow. His face was gaunt, covered in a thin layer of sweat, and his clothes were torn and stained. But it wasn't his appearance that made me stop dead in my tracks. It was his smile. It was exactly like the woman's. Twisted, stretched too wide, like it shouldn't be possible for a human to look like that. "You shouldn't have come," he whispered, his voice rasping like dry leaves. His hand, skeletal and trembling, reached out toward me. "I told them I wouldn't. I warned them." I took a step back, panic surging through my veins. "Who did you warn? What is this place? What happened to you?" Jonathan's laugh echoed through the small room. It wasn't a laugh. It was a broken, jagged sound, like someone trying to remember how to be human. "They've been here for decades," he muttered. "This hospital, It's not just a hospital. It's a prison. A place where they trap souls. It feeds on us. All of us. The patients. The staff. Even the ones who seem to get out. We never really leave. It never lets us go. I could feel my body growing cold. What do you mean? What do you want from me? Jonathan's smile stretched even wider, and his fingers twitched. You've already been chosen. You came here looking for answers, but now you're part of it. You'll never leave this place. Not unless you do what they want. Help them, or they'll help themselves to you. I stepped backward, my breath shallow and fast. Help them? Who are they? He pointed to the door, and that's when I saw it. In the shadows just outside the doorframe, a figure was standing, watching me. It wasn't human, at least not entirely. It had the shape of a person, but its limbs were long, far too long, and its head was misshapen, bulging in places where it shouldn't. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dark, like a predator's. I didn't need to know more. I turned and ran, but Jonathan's voice echoed in my ears. If you don't make it out, we all die, he whispered, and you'll never be alone again. I bolted through the hallways, knowing with every passing second that whatever was hunting me was closer, faster. The walls seemed to close in as the footsteps grew louder, the whispers blending with my own panicked breath. But I didn't stop. Couldn't. Not now. The exit was just ahead. I could see the lights flickering faintly in the distance. A sliver of hope. But as I neared it, the door slammed shut, and I felt a cold hand wrap around my ankle. I screamed, kicking with all my strength, but the grip didn't loosen. Looking down, I saw a face. Pale, twisted, the same face as the woman in my room. The same face as Jonathan's. You can't leave, she hissed, her eyes wide with madness. You belong here now. I felt myself being dragged back, the darkness swallowing me whole. My screams echoed through the empty hospital, but I knew, deep inside, that they wouldn't be heard. No one would ever come for me. No one would even remember I existed, because in St. Vincent's Hospital, no one ever truly leaves. I woke up in a room I didn't recognize. The air was stale, thick with the smell of antiseptic and something else. Something foul. My body ached, my muscles sore and weak, like I had been dragged through hell and back. I sat up, my head spinning as I tried to make sense of where I was. The room looked like any other hospital room. White walls, dim fluorescent lighting overhead, a single bed, and a window that was too high to see through. But there was something off about it. The walls weren't just stained with age. They were cracked, like the foundation of this place was starting to crumble, eroding bit by bit. I rubbed my eyes, trying to clear the fog from my mind, and that's when I noticed it. A small note resting on the table beside the bed. I reached for it, my hands trembling. It read, "You are here forever. Don't try to leave." I froze. The handwriting was shaky, but the message was clear. A cold dread washed over me, and the room seemed to tilt as I tried to stand. My legs buckled beneath me, and I collapsed back onto the bed, gasping for breath. Suddenly, I heard the sound of footsteps outside the door. Soft, deliberate, like they were waiting for me to make a sound. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't come in, praying that if I stayed silent enough, they'd leave. But the door creaked open, slowly, as though it had been waiting for that exact moment. A figure stepped inside. It was the nurse, one I hadn't seen before, but her smile was just as unnerving as all the others. Her eyes were hollow, vacant, like she had no soul left to give. "How are you feeling?" she asked, her voice calm, far too calm. I didn't answer. My heart was pounding in my chest, my mind racing. I could feel the walls closing in again, the same sense of suffocation I had felt earlier. She moved toward the bed, her footsteps soft and rhythmic, like she was part of the very fabric of this place. "You've been chosen," she whispered. "You're one of us now." I shook my head, trying to fight the dizziness that was clouding my thoughts. No, I'm not one of you. I'm not like them." Her smile didn't fade. "You're exactly like us. There's no escape, Not anymore. You're just another soul. Trapped here. like all the others. I stood up, my body still weak, my legs shaking beneath me. Where is Jonathan? What happened to him? What happened to everyone here? The nurse stepped closer, her gaze darkening, her voice lowering to a chilling whisper. Jonathan is part of the system now, just like you will be. The hospital feeds on the living, keeps us here in this cycle, forever. I took a step back, my mind reeling. The whispers, the shadows, the twisted faces. It was all part of it. The hospital was alive, feeding off us, and I had been brought into it. But there was something in the back of my mind, a faint memory, a tiny spark of clarity, a way out. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe I could still escape. I'm getting out, I said, my voice shaking but firm. The nurse's eyes widened in mock surprise. You think you can escape? You think it's that simple? I didn't answer. Couldn't. There was no way out, not through the front door. Not through any door. This place, this hellish maze, didn't have an exit. But I had to try. I had to do something. Anything. I ran past her, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my heart hammering in my chest. The hospital was alive, it was watching, but there had to be a way to break free. I pushed through the corridors, my footsteps echoing in the endless halls. But no matter where I went, it felt like I was running in circles. I could feel it. Feel the hospital pulling me back, tightening its grip on me. And then, just as I turned a corner, I saw it. The door. The final door. It was massive, old, covered in rust, and unlike any other door I had seen before. It was the one place I hadn't dared to go, the place where no one was ever allowed. I pushed against it, the metal groaning in protest as I forced it open. What I saw on the other side made my blood run cold. The room was filled with people, but they weren't people. They were shells, empty, soulless beings, all trapped in some kind of eternal slumber. Their eyes were wide open, their mouths frozen in screams, but they weren't moving. They weren't alive. And in the center of the room, standing among them, was Jonathan. His face was pale, his eyes sunken and lifeless, but his grin was still there, that twisted, unnatural smile. You shouldn't have come, he whispered, his voice low, rasping. You can't escape. None of us can. I took a step back, the door slamming shut behind me, sealing me inside with the others. There was no escape, no end, no way out. St. Vincent's Hospital had claimed me, just like it had claimed so many others before me. And now there would be no more whispers, no more running, no more hope, because in this place we were all the same, lost, trapped, forever. I sat there, frozen, in the center of that room, my mind struggling to comprehend the horror around me. The faces of the people, no, the remains of the people, were locked in expressions of pure terror. Their eyes were wide open, their mouths agape, as if they had been caught in a moment of unimaginable pain. But there was no movement, no life. Jonathan stood at the center of it all, his smile wide and unsettling, his body stiff as though it too had become part of the hospital's twisted existence. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to move, like the very walls of the hospital were alive, watching, feeding. You can feel it now, can't you? Jonathan's voice echoed in the space between us. The hunger, the pull, the need for more. I shook my head, desperate to deny what I was hearing. This isn't real. Can't be. This is just some nightmare. His eyes darkened, and the smile on his face twisted even further. This is no dream. This is your reality now. You're part of it. You were always part of it. St. Vincent's isn't just a hospital. It's a place that feeds on souls, keeps them, traps them, and makes them one of its own. I felt a cold hand graze my arm, and I jerked away. I didn't have the strength to fight anymore. The room was closing in, suffocating me, and I felt like I was being absorbed by the walls themselves. There was no escaping it. Jonathan's words repeated in my mind. You can't escape. None of us can. I staggered back, trying to make sense of it all. But there has to be something. There has to be a way to end it. His laugh was the last thing I heard before the room fell silent. End it? he asked, his voice mocking. You think you can destroy something that has been here for centuries? Something that feeds on fear, on pain, on the living? It's a cycle, a never-ending loop. You can't escape the hunger. Suddenly, everything clicked. The reason I had been drawn here, the reason I had felt the pull the moment I stepped inside the building, was because I was meant to be part of the cycle. I was just another soul to be fed on, to be trapped here like the others. The hospital wasn't a place, it was a living, breathing entity. It didn't just take lives. It created them, made them a part of itself, until there was nothing left but the hollow shell of a person. And once you entered, you couldn't leave. Not in the way you thought. The others in the room, Jonathan, the twisted figures, were all just like me. They had once been living, breathing people, and now they were part of the hospital, existing in a state of perpetual torment. They were no longer human. They were echoes. I felt something tugging at me. The floor beneath me seemed to shift, and I felt myself sinking deeper into the ground. The air grew colder, suffocating, and I knew that I was being consumed, just like all the others, just like Jonathan. You're part of us now, he whispered, his voice fading as I felt myself being pulled into the shadows. You'll never leave. None of us ever do. And as I felt myself dissolve into the cold, dark void of St. Vincent's Hospital, I understood. The cycle never ends. It never stops. Once you enter, you are forever bound to this place. And so, I became another face in the crowd, another lost soul trapped within the walls of a hospital that was no longer just a building. It was alive, and it would never stop.